The wind howled through the towering Douglas firs, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep straight into my bones. That was the first hint that something was off, something I didn't yet understand. It was October 2023, and I had decided on a solo camping trip deep in the Olympic National Forest, Washington State. I wanted to escape the city, the constant notifications, the endless stress of deadlines, and the cacophony of urban life. Nature, I thought, would reset me. What I didn't know was that the wilderness I sought sanctuary in had secrets far older and darker than I could imagine. Secrets that had been waiting in the shadows for decades. My name is Jake. I run a small tech consulting business in Seattle. Long hours staring at screens, endless emails, and the grind of city life had been slowly eroding my sense of self. When my friend Marcus suggested I try camping in the Hoh rainforest area, I jumped at the idea. Disconnect, he said. Let the Pacific Northwest work its magic. I didn't realize how literal his advice would turn out to be. I packed my Subaru meticulously, making sure my tent, stove, sleeping bag, and extra layers were all ready. The drive west was quiet, almost meditative. Highway 101 winds along the rugged coast, cutting through tiny logging towns and offering glimpses of the vast Pacific Ocean. Forks, Washington, appeared on the map like a dot of civilization surrounded by green infinity. I stopped at the general store for supplies. It was the kind of town tourists recognize from vampire movies from the early 2000s. I chuckled to myself at the irony, oblivious at the time to how darkly prophetic that detail would feel later. The locals were polite, if a little rushed, closing early even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. Something about their hurried politeness felt off. By late afternoon, I found my campsite just as the sun began to dip behind the massive evergreens. The Olympic National Forest is breathtaking, a place where trees stretch over 300 feet, draped in thick, green moss that drips from every branch like the set of a fairy tale. The air smelled earthy, damp, and alive, heavy with the scent of decomposing leaves. Here, every shadow seemed to breathe, every sound hinted at hidden life. Setting up my tent was harder than I expected. I had practiced in my backyard, but the uneven forest floor and constant drizzle slowed me down. By the time I secured my tent, darkness had fallen faster than I anticipated. The canopy above was thick and almost impenetrable, letting through only scraps of moonlight. My small circle of lantern light became an island of safety in an ocean of black. I cooked a simple dinner, instant noodles and canned soup, over my portable stove. Around me, the forest whispered. Owls called in the distance, small creatures rustled through the underbrush, and somewhere far off, the faint sound of a creek gurgled through the darkness. It should have been serene, even therapeutic, but the forest felt wrong. Moments of silence seemed unnatural, broken by bursts of sound that didn't fit any rhythm I knew. Something about it seemed alive, aware, watching. That first night, sleep came fitfully. Every rustle and snap of branches made me jump. Around midnight, I woke to slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. They paused, then moved again, deliberate and quiet. Too light for a bear, too purposeful for a deer. My heart pounded. Hours, or perhaps minutes, time felt distorted, passed before the sounds finally faded, leaving me alone in the cold, wet darkness. I convinced myself it had been my imagination, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Morning brought light, relief, and a false sense of security. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating ferns and wildflowers. The forest was magical, almost ethereal, but I carried a lingering unease. Coffee in hand, I explored nearby, discovering a crystal-clear creek just a quarter-mile away. The cold, pristine water refreshed me, but the feeling of being watched never left. Even in daylight, the forest seemed alive, breathing around me, holding its secrets just out of sight. As I planned my first hike, I felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with a gnawing anxiety. The Olympic National Forest promised adventure, beauty, and solitude, but beneath that surface, I was about to discover that some parts of the wilderness are not meant for humans. That something older, darker, and patient waited, and it had already taken notice of me. I told myself I was overreacting. After all, the Pacific Northwest is home to all kinds of wildlife. Deer, elk, raccoons, even bears sometimes wander the trails. Surely, whatever had circled my tent was one of them, right? I packed my day pack carefully, filling my water bottles with ice-cold creek water, grabbing my hiking boots, jacket, and a small first aid kit. The air was crisp, damp with morning dew, and smelled faintly of pine and moss. The sounds of the forest were layered and complex. Birds calling from high branches, small animals skittering through fallen leaves, and the gentle rush of water from the creek. Yet, beneath all this natural music, a tension lingered, a subtle vibration in the air that made my skin tingle. The trail I chose was an old logging path that had been reclaimed by the forest over decades. Tree roots twisted along the path, moss-covered stumps marked the spots where ancient giants had fallen, and ferns created delicate green carpets over the ground. Every step I took felt immersive, as if I was walking through a living, breathing ecosystem that had existed long before humans arrived. At first, the hike was enchanting. I stopped frequently to photograph unusual mushrooms, intricate lichen patterns, and the way sunlight glimmered on damp leaves. Birds I couldn't identify sang melodic calls from the treetops. The Pacific Northwest forest has a way of making you forget time, and for several hours, I lost myself in its quiet majesty. But as the afternoon shadows lengthened, the uneasy feeling returned. I felt it first as a prickling along my neck and arms, the unmistakable sense of being watched. It was subtle at first, like a whisper at the edge of perception. I stopped and spun slowly, scanning the dense undergrowth. Nothing moved, yet the sensation intensified. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch sounded too deliberate to be just the wind. I began using small tactics to mask my unease. Pretending to inspect plants, adjusting my backpack, and slowly turning in circles to monitor the shadows behind me. Twice I thought I glimpsed movement, shapes that disappeared when I blinked. Once, a branch cracked loudly behind me, and I froze mid-step, heart pounding, only to find empty forest. It felt as if something was following my every move, staying just beyond the limits of visibility. By late afternoon, I was about 2 miles from my campsite, and the forest seemed almost oppressive. The sunlight dimmed as the canopy thickened, turning the greens into a muted palette of shadows. Every bird call seemed hesitant, every rustle too purposeful. I realized that fear was changing how I perceived the forest. Its natural rhythm felt distorted, its life suddenly ominous. The feeling of being tracked grew stronger as I started my return journey. Branches snapped at odd intervals, and occasionally I could swear I heard soft, deliberate footsteps matching my pace, but never revealing themselves. Once, I paused and listened so intently I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in the silence. Then came something new, a faint exhale, too low to be human, too measured to be animal. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, scanning the dense brush, but saw only twisted roots and shadows. By the time I stumbled back to my campsite, my heart raced, and every nerve in my body was on high alert. The comfort of my little clearing, with its small fire pit and protective trees, offered some reassurance, but it was fragile. Darkness would fall soon, and I wasn't sure the forest's mysteries had revealed themselves fully yet. That second evening, I built a fire, determined to push back the growing darkness. Flames crackled and sparked, filling the campsite with warmth and light. I ate quickly, trying to ignore the growing sense that something was just beyond reach, something intelligent, patient, and curious. As the fire threw shadows across the ancient trunks, I couldn't shake the feeling of being studied. And then it happened. The voice, a whisper carried by the wind, or something else entirely. It spoke my name. Just once, a soft, deliberate sound. Jake. The syllable lingered in the cold air, warm and intimate, yet horrifyingly unnatural. My body froze. There was no one around, no sign of other humans for miles. Yet that voice knew me, knew my name. I called out, my own voice trembling, trying to pierce the eerie quiet. "Who's there?" The forest swallowed my words. No response came, only the whisper of leaves and the crackling fire. I added more wood, feeding the flames as though their warmth could hold back the unknown. Then I saw them. Eyes. 2 points of light reflecting the fire, positioned at the edge of my illuminated circle. They didn't blink, didn't shift, simply watched with a deliberate intelligence that made my blood run cold. When I swept my flashlight toward them, the eyes vanished. Yet when I lowered it, they were back, closer now, unyielding, observing. Sleep was impossible. I retreated to my tent but left it unzipped, my senses straining in the darkness. Outside, the fire flickered and hissed, and those eyes, always just beyond reach, watched. Occasionally, I thought I glimpsed a pale, elongated shape, impossibly thin, blending into the shadows. Something ancient was here, aware of me, and waiting. The morning after the second night arrived with a fragile calm. Sunlight pierced the canopy in thin, hesitant beams, dust motes dancing like tiny spirits in the golden haze. I felt exhausted but determined. Whatever haunted these woods had been patient, intelligent, and unsettling, but I wasn't going to retreat yet. My curiosity, though tinged with fear, pushed me onward. I packed lightly for the day, taking water, snacks, and a small notebook to record my observations. The Olympic National Forest trails are notoriously deceptive. Paths seem to fork endlessly, and old logging roads vanish beneath decades of moss and fallen trees. I chose a trail that led deeper into the old growth, further than I had ventured before. Each step brought a symphony of sensory details. Moss so thick it cushioned my boots, the earthy scent of wet leaves, and the quiet drip of water from the canopy above. For several hours, I felt almost normal again. Birds called from high branches, squirrels darted between stumps, and the occasional sunbeam created natural spotlights on the forest floor. I stopped frequently, documenting rare mushrooms and patterns of lichen, reminding myself that the Pacific Northwest forest is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in America. But the sense of being watched never fully left. Shadows shifted unnaturally, the wind seemed to carry whispered sounds, and my instincts screamed caution. About 3 miles from my campsite, I stumbled upon a small clearing that seemed oddly deliberate, almost curated. The first thing I noticed were the stumps, massive remnants of trees cut down decades ago, slowly being reclaimed by moss and time. But scattered among them were bones. Animal bones, I assumed at first. Deer, rabbits, maybe small predators. But the arrangement was deliberate. Circles, arcs, patterns suggesting intelligence behind their placement. My stomach churned. Nature doesn't create patterns like this. Then I saw it, the human skeleton. Most of it remained, carefully laid in the center of the largest bone circle. The bones were old, weathered, sun-bleached, but arranged with intention. Around the skull, smaller animal bones formed intricate patterns, almost ritualistic in design. My pulse quickened. The Pacific Northwest has a history of strange folklore, but this felt palpably real and terrifying. I approached cautiously, documenting the scene with my notebook and camera. The skull showed deep gouges, possibly from large teeth or claws, but far too precise for any known predator. The jaw was missing, some teeth scattered nearby. I could almost feel the centuries of silence pressing down on me as I knelt to examine it more closely. Something made me look up. On a nearby stump, I noticed carvings. Angular symbols etched into the dark wood, precise and deliberate, unlike anything I had seen in Native American petroglyphs or casual graffiti. The shapes created a subtle optical illusion, seeming to shift when seen from the corner of my eye. There was intelligence here, intent, purpose. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. The Pacific Northwest forest can be forgiving, but it can also hide dangers we aren't meant to encounter. And yet, I couldn't look away. The patterns, the bones, the symbols, they demanded observation, comprehension. A morbid curiosity rooted me to the spot as I tried to decipher the carvings. The sun was low when I finally tore myself away. The hike back to camp was agonizing. My eyes darted to every shadow, convinced that movement lurked just out of reach. The normal sounds of the forest, the bird calls, The rustling of small mammals were gone, replaced by oppressive silence. I felt small, exposed, and acutely aware that whatever had left the bone's circle might still be watching. When I reached my campsite, darkness had already fallen. My fire had burned to cold embers, and the forest seemed even larger and more threatening in the shadows. I quickly rebuilt the flames, trying to create a protective barrier of light against the unknown. The sweet, cloying odor that had first hinted at something unnatural lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of wet leaves. My stomach turned at the thought of what else might be out there. Around 9 o'clock, the whisper came again, closer this time, and more deliberate. "Jake," it breathed, dragging the syllables in a slow, almost sensual cadence. "You found my garden." My throat tightened. The voice was neither distinctly male nor female, yet undeniably sentient. It carried a promise, a hunger, and an intelligence that froze me in place. I grabbed a burning branch from the fire, holding it aloft like a torch. Shadows stretched and danced across the tree trunks, but nothing approached. And yet I could feel it. Eyes, always eyes, just beyond the firelight. Shapes that seemed human but were wrong in proportion, too tall, too thin, moving with a fluid grace, circling my camp with intent. The smell grew stronger, sickly sweet, almost floral, yet underlaid with decay. My teeth chattered despite the fire's warmth. Cold seeped into my bones, unnatural and oppressive. The forest itself seemed complicit, a silent witness to the predator lurking in its heart. I sat by the fire, feeding it constantly, unwilling to leave my circle of safety. Every creak, every rustle, every whisper of wind made me flinch. Sleep was impossible, yet exhaustion pulled at me. Dawn seemed impossibly far away, and I knew the night had only just begun. Darkness had settled over the Olympic National Forest like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The firelight at my campsite flickered weakly, casting long, jittering shadows that seemed alive. My body was tense, every nerve alert, every sense screaming that I was being watched. The sweet, cloying odor, the same that had lingered near the bone's circle, filled the air around me. It was intoxicating, sickening, and undeniably close. Hours passed. I stayed huddled near the fire, brandishing my burning branch as a makeshift weapon, eyes scanning the darkness. And then I saw it. At the edge of the light, a shape emerged. Tall, impossibly thin, humanoid in form yet grotesquely distorted. Its limbs were unnaturally long, fingers like skeletal claws, and it moved with a fluid, inhuman grace that made my stomach churn. It stopped occasionally, tilting its head, examining the fire and the circle of light I clung to. There was intelligence in its posture, a deliberate, predatory curiosity. My heart hammered in my chest. Adrenaline surged, and yet I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away. Its face, I will never forget it. Pale as bone, faintly luminescent, with black, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce straight through me. The mouth was the worst. A gaping maw, rows of teeth like a deep-sea predator, stretching impossibly wide, opening as if to test my fear. It hissed softly, a sound like steam escaping under pressure, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I raised my torch, sweeping it in wide arcs, desperate to illuminate this nightmare. Each movement made it recoil slightly, yet it did not flee. It circled the camp like a predator assessing a trapped animal, its gaze sharp, calculating, patient. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, yet I knew the darkness beyond the firelight would swallow me instantly. The Olympic National Forest, which had seemed so enchanting by day, had become a labyrinth of death and shadows. The temperature around me dropped suddenly, unnaturally. The cold wasn't from the October air, it emanated from the creature itself. It seemed to suck warmth from the world, drawing the life from the forest, and leaving me shivering in place despite my thick jacket and the fire. My teeth chattered, and I could feel my energy draining with each passing second. Survival depended on staying in the light, but the fire could not extend far enough to reach every corner of this forest that had grown menacing in the dark. I considered retreating to the tent, but it was too risky. The creature had already tested the perimeter of my small sanctuary, and I had no doubt it would follow. Instead, I made a desperate decision. I climbed the largest Douglas fir nearby. Its massive trunk was covered in moss, and thick branches formed natural platforms that would allow me to perch 30 feet above the forest floor. My breathing was ragged, heart hammering, but the climb gave me a temporary sense of safety, a vantage point from which to observe and plan. From this height, I watched the creature move through my campsite. It examined every item with deliberate care: my backpack, the fire pit, my scattered supplies. Occasionally, it sniffed the air, tilting its head as if analyzing every scent, every sound. It was intelligent, far more intelligent than any animal I had ever encountered in the Olympic National Forest. My fear deepened as I realized it wasn't hunting blindly. It was studying me, waiting, calculating, knowing I was there and toying with me. When the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, the creature reacted violently. Its body recoiled as if the light burned it, retreating into the shadows with unnatural speed. Yet before disappearing, it looked directly up at me. Its black, hollow eyes locked onto mine for a long, unsettling moment. I felt a cold recognition in its gaze, not animal hunger, not instinct, but awareness. It knew I had survived the night, and it seemed to promise that this encounter was far from over. Exhausted, shivering, and drained, I stayed in the tree until full daylight. Only then did I allow myself to climb down. Every muscle ached from the uncomfortable perch, yet I was alive. I packed my gear swiftly, leaving nothing behind that might attract the creature's attention again. Every sense remained on high alert as I navigated the dense forest back toward my car. The Pacific Northwest, usually so inviting and serene, had transformed into a deadly maze filled with shadows, whispers, and ancient, predatory intelligence. The drive back to camp, or at least a place I could feel momentarily safe, was surreal. My mind replayed every detail of the encounter: the sickly sweet odor, the impossible grace of its movements, the black, hollow eyes, and that nightmarish mouth. I had seen something that was neither fully alive nor dead, something ancient that hunted with patience and cunning. And I realized, with a sinking certainty, that it had learned my face, my scent, and my fear. I survived that night, but the Olympic National Forest had changed forever in my mind. Beauty and danger coexist in these ancient woods, and some creatures remain hidden, patient, and intelligent, waiting for the right moment to strike. That first close encounter had proven one immutable truth: I was not the apex predator here. I was prey, and the forest still had secrets to reveal. Daylight in the Olympic National Forest brought a fragile sense of safety, but my mind remained on edge. Every rustle of leaves, every shift in the wind reminded me of the night before, of the creature's impossible grace, those hollow black eyes, and the predatory patience it had shown. The Pacific Northwest Forest, which had seemed enchanting at first light, now felt like a living labyrinth designed to trap and deceive. I knew I couldn't simply retreat and pretend nothing had happened. Curiosity, and perhaps a stubborn need to understand, pushed me forward. I returned to the Bone Circle clearing, this time from a different trail, determined to examine the site more carefully while remaining vigilant. The forest seemed quieter than usual, the usual chatter of birds and rustling mammals replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. It was as if the woods themselves were watching, waiting, conspiring with whatever had haunted me the previous night. The clearing looked even more sinister in daylight. Sunlight revealed the full scope of the patterns. Bones were arranged with meticulous care, forming intricate geometric shapes. The human skeleton remained at the center, its age undeniable, but its deliberate positioning suggested a ritualistic purpose. The surrounding animal bones were aligned with near-perfect symmetry. Someone, or something, had spent hours, perhaps days, creating this grotesque display. My stomach churned as I realized that it had been left untouched for decades, yet still maintained as if protected by some unseen force. I photographed everything carefully, making sketches and notes. One detail sent a shiver down my spine: the gouges on the human skull. They appeared too precise to have been made by animals, too large to match human teeth. I considered the possibility of predatory wildlife, but the pattern was too organized, almost ceremonial. There was intelligence behind it, intelligence I could feel lingering in the air. On one of the stumps near the clearing, the carvings I had noticed before became clearer in the morning light. Angular symbols etched deep into the wood created optical illusions that seemed to move as I shifted my gaze. I could almost feel them pressing into my mind, drawing my attention compulsively. These were not ordinary markings. They carried an intent, a weight, an ancient significance that made the hair on my arms rise. I decided to retreat briefly to consult what I could find online. Even in the Pacific Northwest, cell service is sparse in the forest depths, but I was able to connect briefly at a higher elevation. I researched the area's history, abandoned logging and mining operations, Native American legends, and recorded disappearances. One entry stood out: a mining camp from the 1890s had vanished entirely during a harsh winter. Search parties scoured the area but found nothing. Local tribes spoke in hushed tones about creatures that roamed the forest, spirits that were neither alive nor dead, hunting travelers who strayed too far from safety. The Pacific Northwest has a rich tapestry of folklore, often brushed off by modern society. Yet the more I read, the more the descriptions matched my experiences. Creatures with elongated limbs, black, hollow eyes, and an unnatural grace had been reported sporadically across the Olympic Peninsula. These entities were said to feed on life energy, leaving the living terrified but unharmed only temporarily. My encounter now seemed less an isolated event and more a thread in a dark, continuing legend. Back at the clearing, I noticed something else. A faint path leading deeper into the forest, almost invisible beneath layers of moss and fallen needles, seemed recently used. The soil was disturbed, as if something had passed through in the last few days. My pulse quickened. Whoever, or whatever, was maintaining the bone circle was still active. The thought that the creature I had seen the night before might be responsible for this ritualistic site made me both terrified and morbidly fascinated. By late afternoon, I returned to my campsite. The Pacific Northwest light was softer now, the sun casting long shadows between the ancient Douglas firs. My fire pit remained cold, but I quickly built a small blaze. As night approached, I felt the familiar prickling sensation. The forest was alive in ways I had only begun to understand. The creature was patient. It had not abandoned its watch. I knew instinctively that it was waiting, observing, perhaps even studying me as I studied its domain. That evening, as darkness fell, the wind carried the faintest whisper, brushing past my ears like a phantom breath. Jake. The name stretched, deliberate, intimate, and horrifying. I froze. The fire flickered, shadows dancing in every direction, and I understood fully that I was dealing with an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. The Pacific Northwest forest was not just a wilderness. It was a hunting ground, and I was firmly in the spotlight. Night fell like a velvet curtain over the Olympic National Forest, the thick canopy swallowing the fading light and turning my campsite into a fragile circle of orange fire. I was exhausted, physically and mentally, but there was no reprieve. Every instinct screamed that the creature was near, observing, calculating, waiting. The sweet, cloying odor lingered, stronger now, almost suffocating, mingling with the earthy scent of wet leaves and moss. I sat as close to the fire as possible, feeding it constantly, holding my torch like a lifeline. The forest, which had seemed welcoming in daylight, was now a labyrinth of shadows. Every rustle, every snap of a branch, every whisper of the wind set my heart racing. I knew I wasn't alone. The creature had learned my habits, my fear, and it had patience. It had been studying me for hours, if not longer. Then I heard it, the zipper of my tent being pulled slowly downward. My blood ran cold. Adrenaline surged through my body, sharpening every sense. I gripped my torch and rose, ready to confront the intruder. A hand reached through the opening of the tent. Pale, unnaturally long fingers ended in nails like claws. The motion was deliberate, confident, a silent threat. I lunged forward with the burning branch. The hand withdrew instantly, but the glimpse I caught left me frozen in terror. The creature's face, a twisted, almost human mask, glowed faintly in the firelight. Skin white as bone, eyes black and hollow, mouth stretching impossibly wide in rows of sharp, predator teeth. It hissed softly, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle, then melted back into the darkness as if the forest itself had swallowed it. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I knew I was far from safe. The Olympic National Forest is vast, but at night, in these deep old-growth sections, there are no paths, no lights, no easy escape. My campsite offered only a fragile sense of security, a circle of fire that could not protect me from something intelligent, patient, and hungry. I made a quick, desperate decision. I would not stay grounded. Using the largest nearby Douglas fir, I climbed as high as I could manage, finding thick branches 30 feet above the forest floor to form a makeshift platform. The climb was exhausting, muscles burning, but it was safer than remaining at the fire. From this vantage point, I could see the creature move with terrifying fluidity. It circled my campsite, examining every item I had left behind, lifting and sniffing backpacks, checking the fire pit, and then retreating just beyond the edge of the light. It was intelligent, too intelligent to be an animal, too deliberate to be a figment of my imagination. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as it explored my camp. It paused, tilted its head, and sniffed the air. Its black eyes seemed to pierce through the smoke and flames, locking onto the place I had vacated only minutes before. There was awareness, recognition, and something far more terrifying: patience. The cold deepened. Not the ordinary chill of an October night in the Pacific Northwest, but a penetrating cold that seemed to leach warmth from my bones. My teeth chattered, my breath fogged in the frigid air, and my body trembled despite the exhaustion and tension. The forest itself seemed complicit, silent, watching, as if acknowledging the creature's dominion over this ancient place. The creature's patience was unnerving. It circled slowly, testing boundaries, sizing up my height, my distance, my vulnerabilities. Every instinct told me it could kill me in an instant, and I understood that survival depended on remaining hidden, remaining vigilant, and not making a single mistake. The fire was useless at this distance, but my eyes had a perfect view of its unnatural movements: elongated limbs, fluid grace, predatory intelligence. Then, as if sensing the first rays of dawn approaching, the creature paused. Its black eyes met mine from the shadows. Recognition, a promise. It would wait, and it would hunt again. My heart hammered as it retreated, melting into the forest with inhuman speed. I stayed in the tree until full daylight, trembling, exhausted, and grateful to be alive. When I finally descended, the campsite felt alien. Every shadow, every branch, every distant sound reminded me that I was not in control. The Olympic National Forest had revealed its secret. I was prey, and something ancient and cunning had learned my scent, my habits, and my fear. My survival depended on intelligence, patience, and luck, and I was acutely aware that the forest had only just begun to test me. Daylight brought no real comfort. The Olympic National Forest, bathed in soft morning light, looked as beautiful as ever. Towering Douglas firs, moss-covered trunks, ferns carpeting the ground, but I could no longer see it without suspicion. Every shadow seemed too deep, every tree too deliberate, as if the forest itself conspired with the creature that had stalked me the night before. I returned to my small campsite cautiously, noting every branch, every footpath, every sound. The fire pit had cooled to ashes, the surrounding brush undisturbed, almost deliberately untouched. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I had experienced. There was intelligence behind this entity. It observed, it learned, it waited. Survival would require me to think like it, anticipate its behavior, and prepare for encounters I could not yet predict. I reviewed my notes and photos from the bone circle. The human skeleton, the geometric arrangement of animal bones, and the carvings on the nearby stumps formed a pattern I was only beginning to understand. The Pacific Northwest is rich in folklore, and the stories I had read about spirits or entities in the Olympic Peninsula seemed to match what I had seen: elongated, humanoid shapes, black eyes, unnatural grace, and an ability to manipulate the environment. The legends spoke of creatures sustained by life force, hunting travelers and disappearing miners, leaving behind subtle signs for the next curious soul. I spent hours examining the campsite and surrounding forest, looking for anything that might hint at the creature's movements. Footprints, scents, disturbances in the undergrowth. There were subtle signs: branches bent at odd angles, moss disrupted, and faint impressions in the soil that I could only see when light hit them at the right angle. The creature left little trace, yet I could sense its presence like an uninvited shadow stretching across the forest floor. I realized I needed a strategy. The Olympic National Forest is vast, but my experience had taught me that the creature had a defined territory. My campsite and the Bone Circle clearing seemed to mark its hunting ground. I would need to stay alert, keep fires burning, and maintain height advantage whenever possible. Trees offered vantage points and relative safety, but the forest was full of obstacles: branches, roots, uneven terrain that could betray me if I became careless. Afternoon brought a brief distraction: the forest's beauty. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating patches of ferns and tiny wildflowers. Birds sang their melodic calls, and a nearby creek gurgled peacefully. For a few minutes, I almost forgot the horror of the previous night. Almost. But the wind carried that familiar sweet and sickly scent, faint but unmistakable, and my heart tightened. The creature was nearby, always observing, always waiting. I revisited the carvings on the stumps near the bone circle. The angular symbols seemed designed to be disturbing, to draw attention and focus. Yet I wondered if they served a practical purpose for the creature: marking territory, communicating, or perhaps maintaining a supernatural influence over the area. I tried to sketch them carefully, documenting every line, every angle, every curve. It was meticulous work, but necessary. Understanding these symbols might provide insight into the creature's intentions or vulnerabilities. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, I returned to my campsite. I reinforced my fire, built barriers with fallen branches, and prepared for the night. The Olympic National Forest is stunning, but I no longer trusted its beauty. Beneath the moss, ferns, and towering trees, an ancient predator ruled. Patience, intelligence, and invisibility were its weapons. I had only my wits, a fire, and vigilance to survive. Night fell, and the familiar dread returned. The fire crackled weakly against the oppressive darkness. I sat with my torch raised, scanning the edges of the light, listening to every creak, every rustle, every whisper of wind. The creature was near. I could feel its presence, lurking just beyond reach, testing boundaries. It moved with purpose, silent, predatory, its black eyes always watching. The whisper came again, soft and deliberate. "Jake." It stretched the syllables, drawing them out in a chilling cadence, intimate and terrifying. I held my ground, torch in hand, muscles tense, every sense alert. I understood fully now. Survival meant anticipation. Understanding the patterns of the hunter, predicting its movements, and respecting its patience were the only ways I could last another night in the Olympic National Forest. Night fell swiftly over the Olympic National Forest, swallowing the last of the fading light and turning the familiar landscape into a shadowy labyrinth. I had climbed the massive Douglas fir again, seeking refuge 30 feet above the forest floor. The branches formed a natural platform, but comfort was minimal. The chill of October air seeped through my clothes, and my muscles ached from holding position for hours. Still, the vantage point offered a fragile sense of safety. From above, I could see the flickering embers of my campsite fire below. My small circle of light and warmth seemed insignificant compared to the vast, ancient forest around me. Every tree, every shadow, every rustling leaf carried potential danger. The creature had learned my habits. It was patient, intelligent, and it was waiting. I knew instinctively that the night would be long, and that any mistake could be fatal. Hours passed. The Olympic National Forest, usually alive with nocturnal sounds, was eerily quiet. Even the usual calls of owls and the rustle of small mammals were subdued, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed on my mind. And then I smelled it. The sickly sweet odor, stronger now, closer. My stomach churned. The creature was near. It had not abandoned me. A movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of shadow and light, but then I saw it. The pale, elongated form moving through the trees with impossible grace. Its limbs were disproportionately long, bending and twisting in ways that defied normal human anatomy. It circled my campsite, observing, testing, calculating. Every step it took was deliberate, silent, predatory. Its black eyes glinted faintly, reflecting the firelight, and my heart hammered as I realized it was aware of my elevated position. It moved closer. I could see its head tilt, as if sniffing the air, analyzing, recognizing. Then it lunged toward the edge of the firelight, testing boundaries. My heart stopped. It paused at the perimeter, just beyond reach, its impossible mouth opening slightly, revealing rows of teeth that belonged in nightmares. The sickly sweet stench was overpowering, filling my senses, making it hard to breathe. I realized survival depended on remaining calm, remaining unseen, and observing its behavior. The creature's intelligence was terrifying. It was not hunting blindly. It understood, calculated, and adapted. Every movement was deliberate, designed to provoke fear, to test my reaction, to learn. I remained still, holding my branch aloft, muscles trembling from cold and tension, watching as it circled, hovered, and then disappeared into the deeper shadows, retreating only when the firelight threatened to expose it fully. Time blurred. Hours passed, each minute stretching longer than the last. The Olympic National Forest felt endless, filled with ancient trees that watched silently as predator and prey played out a deadly game. The creature's presence was constant, even when unseen. I could feel its awareness pressing in from the darkness, a living weight on the forest itself. As dawn approached, the first light of morning pierced the canopy. The creature recoiled as the sunlight touched it, disappearing quickly into the shadows with fluid, unnatural speed. Yet before it vanished, its black eyes found mine in the tree. Recognition, awareness, a promise that this was far from over. I shivered, exhausted, and grateful to be alive, knowing that daylight was my only temporary shield. When I finally climbed down, my body ached from hours of tension and the cold. The campsite below seemed alien, fragile, and utterly exposed. The Olympic National Forest had revealed its true nature, beautiful, ancient, and deadly. I understood now that my survival depended on knowledge, vigilance, and the patience to outthink something far older and more cunning than myself. The Olympic National Forest, bathed in pale morning light, seemed deceptively calm. After the previous night's ordeal, every tree, every shadow, every rustle of leaves carried a weight of unseen danger. My muscles were sore from climbing the massive Douglas fir, and my mind remained on high alert. Survival depended not only on vigilance, but on understanding. I needed to learn what I was dealing with. I returned cautiously to the clearing with the bone circle. The human skeleton remained, still bleached and perfectly arranged, the surrounding animal bones forming geometric patterns that hinted at intelligence beyond human comprehension. My camera and notebook were at the ready. The Pacific Northwest forest, which appeared so serene and inviting by day, now felt like a labyrinth of death, holding secrets that had been buried for decades. Near the largest stump, the angular carvings became clearer in the daylight. The symbols, etched with precision, seemed to pulse with a silent energy. I studied them carefully, sketching each line and curve, hoping to decipher their meaning. Could these markings be a warning, a ritual, or perhaps a map of the creature's territory? Every instinct screamed that the carvings were more than decoration. They were a message, a record left by something ancient, something patient, something supernatural. While examining the stump, I noticed another detail I had missed before, faint impressions in the damp soil nearby. They weren't footprints in the traditional sense, but elongated marks that suggested movement in a way no human or animal could manage. My pulse quickened. Whoever, or whatever, had arranged this site had passed here recently. The Pacific Northwest's dense undergrowth often hides traces of wildlife, yet these marks felt deliberate, calculated, predatory. I documented everything, my hands trembling. The creature had returned, I was certain, and it was far more organized and intelligent than I had realized. The Olympic National Forest, with its ancient Douglas firs, thick moss, and misty ferns, was not merely a backdrop. It was a hunting ground, carefully maintained and respected by this entity. Every pattern, every symbol, every arrangement of bones was part of its dominion. Determined to understand, I spent hours cross-referencing local history and folklore. The area was dotted with abandoned mining camps, logging operations, and forgotten settlements. One story stood out. In the late 1800s, an entire mining camp had vanished during a brutal winter. Search parties found no trace of the miners, though rumors persisted of creatures that prowled the forest, elongated, pale, and intelligent, hunting travelers and anyone who dared enter their territory. My encounter matched these accounts uncannily. The afternoon sun shifted as I explored further. I found another faint trail, partially hidden beneath ferns and moss, that led deeper into the forest. Branches bent unnaturally, moss disturbed in ways that suggested recent passage. My pulse raced. I realized the creature might be marking its territory, maintaining its hunting grounds. I couldn't tell if it had been observing me all along or if it was drawn to my presence by curiosity, hunger, or instinct. By late afternoon, I returned to my campsite. I reinforced my fire, piled branches, and prepared for another night. Every instinct screamed that the creature would not let the day pass without investigation. The Olympic National Forest had become a living, breathing predator, its ancient trees watching silently, its shadows thick with anticipation. As night fell, I noticed movement at the edge of the firelight. Shadows flickered unnaturally. The sweet, sickly odor returned, stronger, more invasive. My muscles tensed. This time, I understood that observation alone would not be enough. The creature was learning, adapting, and testing my defenses. I would need more than vigilance. I would need strategy, intelligence, and luck if I hoped to survive. Then, a whisper cut through the night. "Jake." The voice was low, deliberate, stretching the syllables in a way that sent chills down my spine. I held my torch high, scanning the darkness. The creature was near, unseen but unmistakable, its patience almost unbearable. The Olympic National Forest had revealed a truth I could not ignore. I was in a hunting ground, prey for an intelligence far older and more cunning than I had ever imagined. Survival meant understanding its patterns, respecting its patience, and staying one step ahead. Night had fallen over the Olympic National Forest once again, thick and suffocating. The canopy above blocked nearly all moonlight, leaving only my fragile fire as a tiny island of safety. I had reinforced the perimeter with fallen branches, stacked rocks, and anything I could find, but instinct told me it wouldn't be enough. The forest itself seemed complicit, every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches carrying a weight of unseen danger. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by distant sounds, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, and that sickly sweet odor that had become my constant companion. My eyes scanned the darkness, every sense on high alert. I knew the creature was near, lurking just beyond the firelight, learning, observing, calculating. Its patience was terrifying, and I understood fully that my survival depended on not panicking. Then I heard it, a snap of a branch, deliberate and precise. My heart froze. I swept the torch in the direction of the sound. Shadows shifted unnaturally. The creature had moved closer, drawn by my presence, curious and hungry. Its form remained partially hidden, elongated limbs blending seamlessly with the darkness of the Olympic National Forest. It was silent, predator and observer, studying me as much as I studied it. I realized I was cornered. Retreating to the tent or trying to flee would be suicidal. The creature had intelligence, patience, and speed beyond comprehension. My mind raced. Survival required strategy. I had to force it to reveal itself while maintaining the fragile barrier of firelight. Every instinct screamed that hesitation would be fatal. The sweet, cloying odor intensified. My teeth chattered in the cold October air, despite the fire. Shadows shifted again, and I caught a glimpse of the creature, pale, humanoid, disturbingly thin, with black, hollow eyes reflecting the firelight. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. A soft hiss escaped it, like steam from a pressure valve, and I felt the weight of its awareness pressing against my mind. I gripped my burning branch tightly, scanning for movement, for any sign that might betray its position. The creature circled, testing the edges of the firelight, moving with predatory grace that defied natural physics. Its limbs twisted and bent unnaturally as it shifted between shadows and light. I realized it was learning my defenses, assessing my reactions, and adapting. The Olympic National Forest, once beautiful and serene, had become a deadly arena, and I was the unwilling participant. Time stretched. Each minute felt like an hour. The creature was close, but it had not attacked outright, yet. Its patience was part of the terror. It had the power to end me instantly, but it chose not to, prolonging the fear, toying with me, studying me as carefully as I studied it. My mind raced for solutions, for ways to survive another night. The fire was my lifeline, but it could only protect me so far. A whisper sliced through the darkness. "Jake." The sound was deliberate, intimate, chilling. I realized with a shiver that the creature was communicating, taunting, drawing power from fear itself. The forest, alive with ancient trees and thick moss, seemed to amplify its presence. I understood that I was not merely facing an animal. I was confronting an intelligence that had existed here long before me, hidden in the shadows of the Olympic National Forest. Desperation pushed me to action. I scanned my surroundings for anything that could give me an advantage. I noticed a narrow creek nearby, reflecting faint starlight, and a cluster of trees that could provide higher vantage points. Survival depended on using the terrain, understanding the creature's habits, and staying unpredictable. My mind raced with plans, contingency upon contingency, each designed to outthink a predator far more cunning than myself. I held my torch high, scanning the darkness, every nerve alert. Then I saw it, a pale, elongated form moving unnaturally through the undergrowth. Its limbs stretched and twisted with impossible grace, and its black eyes glinted as they caught the firelight. My heart raced. It was circling closer, testing boundaries, observing my reactions. The creature hissed softly, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle, and I understood immediately that it had no intention of retreating this time. My mind raced, considering my options. Fleeing to the tent or remaining on the ground would be suicide. I had to use the terrain, use height and firelight as my only defenses. Every instinct screamed that I needed a plan, fast. I spotted the creek nearby, its surface reflecting faint starlight. If I could reach it, I might use the sound and movement of the water to mask my approach. I also noticed a cluster of sturdy trees forming a natural barrier between me and the deeper forest. With careful, deliberate movements, I prepared to make my escape. Each step had to be silent, each decision precise. Then it lunged. The creature moved faster than I could track, crossing the gap between the shadows and the edge of the firelight in a fluid motion. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, glinting teeth. My scream caught in my throat as I ducked behind a tree, torch raised. Its black eyes seemed to pierce through me, analyzing, calculating, and for a horrifying moment, I thought it would strike me down instantly. Adrenaline surged. I waited for the right moment, then bolted toward the creek, throwing a burning branch to the side to distract the creature. The firelight flared, casting shadows that confused its senses for just enough time. I ran, limbs screaming, heart hammering, each footstep on the wet forest floor threatening to betray my position. The creature followed, moving with impossible speed and fluidity, its hiss a constant reminder that it was still in pursuit. I reached the creek and waded into the cold, rushing water. The sound masked my movements, and the slippery rocks forced the creature to hesitate, just for a moment. I scrambled across, splashing and keeping low, using the water as a barrier. The sickly sweet odor intensified, but I forced myself to focus on the path ahead, on each precarious step, on every move that might keep me alive. By the time I reached the cluster of trees, my chest heaved with exhaustion, and my muscles burned. I climbed as high as I could, finding a platform among thick branches. From this vantage point, I could see the creature move along the edge of the creek, circling, sniffing, and testing boundaries. It hissed again, frustrated by my escape, and I realized I had survived only by exploiting its momentary distraction and using the terrain to my advantage. The forest was quiet after that, but the weight of the encounter lingered. I stayed in the trees, shivering from cold, fear, and adrenaline, until the first light of dawn pierced the Olympic National Forest canopy. The creature recoiled at the sunlight, retreating into deeper shadows, but not before its black eyes met mine. Recognition, awareness, and a promise it would return. I understood then that survival was not guaranteed, and that the forest held secrets older and more dangerous than I could comprehend. When I finally climbed down, I gathered my remaining gear as quickly as possible. The campsite, once familiar, now seemed alien and vulnerable. Every shadow, every branch, every distant sound reminded me that I was still prey in a forest that had claimed countless others before me. The Olympic National Forest had revealed its deadly nature, beauty and danger intertwined, patience and intelligence hunting in the shadows, and I was only just beginning to understand what it meant to survive. The first light of morning filtered through the thick canopy of the Olympic National Forest, offering a brief reprieve from the terror of the night. My muscles were sore, my body shivering from exhaustion and the cold, but I knew I couldn't afford to relax. The creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows of this vast wilderness, and patience was its greatest weapon. Survival would require intelligence, vigilance, and understanding. I returned to my small campsite cautiously, moving silently through the damp undergrowth. The fire pit had cooled to gray ashes, and the forest seemed deceptively calm. The Pacific Northwest, with its towering Douglas firs, moss-draped branches, and fern-covered ground, appeared tranquil, but I knew better. Beneath the beauty, the forest hid a predator of extraordinary intelligence, patience, and supernatural power. I examined my notes and photographs from the bone circle again. The human skeleton, the meticulously arranged animal bones, and the angular carvings on the stumps suggested a ritualistic purpose. The patterns were deliberate, geometric, and oddly precise. The legends I had read described entities that were neither fully alive nor completely dead, sustained by life energy, and capable of influencing the forest around them. I began to suspect that the creature I had encountered was one of these entities, an ancient predator that had haunted the Olympic National Forest for decades, perhaps centuries. The angular carvings demanded careful study. I sketched them meticulously, analyzing the lines, the angles, and the spaces between. They weren't just symbols, they were a record, a map, a warning, or perhaps even a form of communication. I realized that if I could understand their meaning, I might gain insight into the creature's habits, its territory, and possibly its weaknesses. The Pacific Northwest Forest had many secrets, but the carvings were a tangible connection to the ancient intelligence that hunted here. I also reviewed the faint impressions in the soil around the bone circle. They were elongated and unnatural, suggesting movement impossible for any human or known animal. These were signs of presence, evidence that the entity maintained and patrolled its territory. My pulse quickened as I recognized a pattern. The creature marked its hunting ground, observed intruders, and tested them over time. Understanding this behavior was critical. Afternoon brought a moment of uneasy calm. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating patches of ferns and moss. Birds called melodically, and the sound of a distant creak added a deceptive serenity. But the sickly sweet odor lingered faintly on the wind, a constant reminder that the creature had not abandoned me. My senses remained heightened, my body tense, every rustle of leaves or shift in the wind setting off a surge of adrenaline. I realized that survival required patience as much as courage. The Olympic National Forest was a hunting ground where fear and intelligence were weapons. The creature's patience was terrifying, its intelligence formidable, and its presence nearly constant. I began to formulate a strategy: use the terrain, control the fire, observe its patterns, and always remain unpredictable. Any mistake could be fatal, and I had already learned the price of misjudgment. As night approached, I reinforced my fire and climbed a nearby tree to monitor the surroundings. The Pacific Northwest darkness pressed in, but I felt slightly safer with a vantage point. From above, I could watch the edges of my campsite and the forest beyond. The creature moved with fluid grace, silent, almost invisible against the shadows. It was intelligent, patient, and methodical, testing my defenses and my resolve. I knew this night would be another trial, another test of my wits and courage. The first whisper came as darkness settled fully. "Jake." The voice was deliberate, intimate, and terrifying. I gripped my torch, muscles tense, and prepared for another night in the Olympic National Forest, aware that survival would depend on vigilance, intelligence, and understanding the predator I faced. The creature was ancient, cunning, and utterly relentless, and I had only just begun to learn its patterns. Then I heard it, a low, deliberate hiss, almost like steam escaping under pressure. The creature had returned. I realized that I was no longer merely a passive observer. The creature's patience had limits, and it was beginning to assert dominance. Survival depended on strategy and quick thinking. I adjusted my position on the branch, ensuring I had a clear view of the ground below and the surrounding forest. My heart pounded as I tried to anticipate its next move, knowing that one misstep could be fatal. The creature circled closer. Its pale, unnaturally thin form moved with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. It paused at the edge of the firelight, tilting its head as if assessing my strength, my fear, my resolve. The sickly sweet odor intensified, pressing into my senses, making it hard to breathe. I gripped my torch like a lifeline, aware that it might be the only thing separating me from the predator's lethal reach. Then it struck. The creature lunged from the shadows, moving faster than my eyes could track. I swung the torch desperately, the flames illuminating its horrific visage. Pale skin, black hollow eyes, a mouth stretched impossibly wide, filled with sharp, glistening teeth. The hiss turned into a high-pitched screech, echoing through the Olympic National Forest, sending every nerve in my body into overdrive. I leapt to another branch, narrowly avoiding its grasp. The creature paused, recalibrating, then circled back, testing the fire's edge. I realized that direct confrontation was impossible. Survival required distraction, misdirection, and exploiting the environment. I scanned the area and spotted the creek nearby. Its flowing water might mask my movements, provide a temporary barrier, and give me a chance to reposition. Timing was critical. I waited for the creature to focus on the firelight, then made a calculated move, dropping carefully to the forest floor and sprinting toward the creek. The firelight flared as I disturbed a pile of branches, momentarily confusing the predator. Its hiss turned to a screech of frustration as it lunged toward the sound, missing me by mere feet. The Pacific Northwest forest blurred around me as adrenaline surged through my veins. I plunged into the creek, the icy water shocking my body and masking the sound of my footsteps. Rocks slipped beneath my feet, but I pushed forward, moving with deliberate urgency. The creature followed, but the uneven terrain and flowing water slowed its movements just enough to keep me ahead. I glanced back, catching a glimpse of its elongated form skimming across the rocks with unnatural agility, black eyes tracking my every movement. By the time I reached a cluster of trees farther upstream, my lungs burned and my body ached from exertion. I climbed as high as I could manage, perching on a sturdy branch and catching my breath. The creature had not abandoned the pursuit, but the water and terrain had given me a temporary advantage. I knew this night was only a glimpse of the trials ahead. Survival in the Olympic National Forest would demand every ounce of intelligence, courage, and resourcefulness I could muster. I had spent the previous night moving cautiously through the forest, using the terrain to my advantage, and observing patterns in the creature's behavior. Its elongated limbs, unnatural speed, and black, hollow eyes made it clear that this was no ordinary predator. The bone circle, the carvings, and the sickly sweet odor all pointed to something ancient, supernatural, and highly intelligent. Survival depended on understanding it, anticipating it, and staying one step ahead. As I moved carefully through the undergrowth, my eyes scanned for anything unusual, disturbances in the moss, footprints, carvings, or signs of the creature's presence. The Pacific Northwest forest, with its dense ferns, twisted roots, and towering trees, made it difficult to distinguish natural features from those deliberately altered. My heart raced with every shadow that flickered across my path. Then I saw it. A partially hidden tree stump, smaller than the one at the bone circle, with symbols etched into its surface. At first, the carvings seemed chaotic, but as I examined them, I noticed patterns similar to the previous stump. Angular lines, geometric shapes, and small depressions in the wood suggested intentionality, like a map or guide. I realized these symbols might mark areas where the creature hunted or rested, or even locations of significance within its territory. Closer inspection revealed another clue: small animal bones arranged in a deliberate pattern around the base of the stump. Unlike the chaotic natural scatter of wildlife, these bones formed concentric circles and radial lines pointing outward. My pulse quickened. The arrangement echoed the bone circle I had discovered earlier, suggesting a ritualistic or communicative purpose. Perhaps understanding this pattern could provide insight into the creature's behavior, weaknesses, or preferences. I documented everything carefully, sketching the symbols and photographing the bone arrangement. The Pacific Northwest forest seemed to hold its breath as I worked, the dense moss and towering Douglas firs amplifying the silence. I could feel the predator's presence in the distance, aware of my activity, patient and watchful. Its black eyes could be anywhere, just beyond my vision, reflecting the firelight of my imagination. Determined to use this clue, I considered my options. The carvings and bone patterns suggested a territory, a hunting ground with defined boundaries. If I could predict the creature's movements, I might avoid direct encounters and use the forest itself to protect me. My plan was simple in theory, but dangerous in practice. Observe the predator, identify patterns, and exploit the environment of the Olympic National Forest for survival. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, I set up a temporary camp near a large rock formation, using it as a natural barrier. The Pacific Northwest forest's dense undergrowth, fallen branches, and thick moss provided both concealment and obstacles for the creature. I built a small fire, careful to keep it contained while providing enough light to monitor the immediate area. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, every faint scent carried a warning. The predator was near. That night, the creature returned. Its hiss cut through the darkness, echoing among the trees of the Olympic National Forest. But this time, I felt prepared. Using the clue I had discovered, the carvings and bone patterns, I anticipated its movements, positioning myself where I could observe without being immediately exposed. The sickly sweet odor filled the air, but I stayed calm, focused, and ready. Knowledge had given me an edge, however slim, and I intended to use it to survive the night. The Pacific Northwest air was cold, damp, and filled with the scent of earth and decaying leaves. But beneath it lingered the sickly sweet odor, the unmistakable presence of the predator. My muscles ached from days of tension, my body shivering despite layers of clothing, but my mind was sharp. I knew this night could be my last if I miscalculated. Hours passed in tense silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, amplifying every distant sound: the rustle of moss, the snap of a twig, the call of an unseen bird. Then, A low hiss slithered through the trees. The creature had arrived, circling, testing, observing. Its elongated, pale limbs moved with fluid grace, black eyes glinting faintly as they reflected the firelight. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth, each movement deliberate and predatory. Using the clues I had discovered, I anticipated its approach. The carvings and bone patterns suggested the creature favored certain paths, marking its territory carefully. I stayed hidden, observing its pattern, waiting for the right moment. The Olympic National Forest had become a deadly chessboard, and every move counted. My pulse pounded as I realized I was no longer merely fleeing. I was outthinking a predator older than any record of the forest. The creature lunged, moving faster than my eyes could track. I stayed low, ducking behind the rock formation, the fire illuminating its horrific visage briefly. Pale skin, hollow black eyes, and a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. Its hiss turned to a screech of frustration. I understood then that knowledge had given me an edge. It could not predict every movement. Its patience had limits, and now it was testing the boundaries of its hunting ground. I made my move. Using the terrain, the firelight, and the creature's predictable path, I ran along a pre-planned route through the undergrowth. My heart raced, every step deliberate. Rocks, roots, and fallen branches became tools, creating obstacles that slowed the predator just enough to stay ahead. The sickly sweet odor pressed against me, and I could sense the creature's awareness, its intelligence calculating my every move. I reached the creek, plunging into the icy water. The sound masked my movements, creating a temporary barrier between myself and the predator. The Olympic National Forest, once a playground of beauty and solitude, had become an arena of survival, its dense ferns and towering Douglas firs witnesses to a life-or-death struggle. The creature followed cautiously, hindered by the uneven terrain and flowing water, giving me a fleeting advantage. By the time I reached a series of large boulders near a secondary clearing, the first rays of dawn pierced the canopy. The creature recoiled at the sunlight, retreating into the deepest shadows of the forest. Black eyes met mine one final time. Recognition, awareness, and a promise that this encounter was not over, even if I had survived. The Pacific Northwest forest returned to a deceptive calm, but I knew the predator remained, patient, intelligent, and eternal. Exhausted, I gathered my gear and began the trek back to civilization. Every step through the Olympic National Forest was cautious, every rustle in the undergrowth a reminder that the predator could still be near. By the time I reached my car, adrenaline and relief collided. I had survived, but the forest had left its mark on me, knowledge that the wilderness, while beautiful, harbors ancient and intelligent predators beyond human understanding. In the weeks that followed, I researched, piecing together stories of vanished miners, ancient carvings, and legends of blood-drinking entities in the Pacific Northwest. The creature I encountered was part of a hidden history, a reminder that the Olympic National Forest is not merely a place of beauty and solitude. It is a place where patience, intelligence, and predation intertwine, and where survival requires more than courage. It requires understanding, vigilance, and respect for forces older than humanity itself. I returned to the city changed, wary of wooded areas, haunted by the black eyes and impossible smile of the creature. The Olympic National Forest had revealed its secrets, and I knew now that some mysteries are alive, patient, and waiting in the shadows.
Thank you for watching my video. Please like, subscribe, and share my channel with your friends and family. You can also click on the bell icon to be notified when I post new videos.